There are researchers that are quite confident extraordinary information related to this issue does exist in the Vatican Library. They can't prove that for obvious reasons. Uh, but I think the odds are highly favorable that, in fact, the Catholic Church does have a lot of information in their library, which they will eventually, I believe, at some point share with us. There are hints about, how would you say, events and so forth, going back hundreds of years that have turned up in various paintings and so forth. But in terms of direct information regarding some sort of interaction between the Catholic Church and the subject of the modern era, which is the extraterrestrial presence, I'm not aware of it. There is recently, and I think I know why this story is sort of in play, is that when David Grush came forward to Ross Coulthart and eventually spoke or testified under oath to a House Senate subcommittee, subcommittee, he mentioned, I believe, a possible event that occurred back in 1933, well predating the Roswell event. And I think there's been a little bit of coverage of that. I think the information that is available is highly limited, so it certainly hasn't been established to my satisfaction. But part of the story is that there eventually this vehicle that might have been attained during the time of Mussolini was essentially eventually gotten to the United States with the assistance of the Catholic Church. But as far as I know, the evidence for that is still paltry, and that a lot of investigation is going to be done before we know for sure what's happening. And frankly, I don't think there's any chance we'll have confirmation of that story until after we get formal disclosure of the extraterrestrial presence and the files start getting brought forward as is intended under the bills that are being submitted to the United States Senate. As far as I know, there have been many books written on fine books written on the research of this phenomena. And the first time I'd ever heard about this potential crash in 33 was when Grush came forward. Now, I'm not saying it didn't turn up somewhere in the literature, but I think by and large that caught just about everybody in the field surprised. But believe me, there's so much research that's been done. I mean, the books you see behind me are 0.1% of the number of books that have been published on this issue. So it's possible that it's turned up, but overall, it simply was not something that I think the vast majority of people that are engaging this issue were aware of. So it was striking, and we're looking forward to learning more. But it is one of countless things that we're simply not going to be able to get a proper understanding of until records are released, and that's not going to happen until we get disclosure, capital D, confirmation by the heads of state of nations, which includes my president and your prime minister. If they had any kind of pre-Roswell information, that is notable. All right. Does that mean that President Truman was aware of a 1933 vehicle that eventually our government got the hands on? Very possibly not. So that's notable. Of course, we'd like to know, all right, it's a great story, and undoubtedly there'll be a documentary about it. But okay, who exactly found it? I think obviously it was members of the Italian government or military. What was the process in which it finally got to us? What was the role of the Catholic Church? It's a great story. And then where was that vehicle taken? How many people in our government even knew about it at the point that Roswell happened? Obviously, the people at Roswell didn't, because they put out a press release that they found a flying saucer. And so clearly there was no significant impediment to putting that story out at the time, because the government felt quite comfortable that this issue is not a problem for us yet, even though they were aware of the Foo Fighter events. They were aware of these plasma balls following planes all over the world in multiple theaters of combat. So that's interesting. Looking forward to learning more about it. But is it very important in the context of what's happening now? Not really. Basic research certainly well covers the Foo Fighter events, which probably were plasma balls of some kind that are somewhat even seen today. And they were turning up amongst our airplanes and the airplanes of our enemies, Japanese, the Germans. And they were reported. They were called Foo Fighters, based upon the word feu, which means fire, I think, in French. And the government knew about that. They got reports about that from their pilots, but they were fighting a war at the time, a rather important war. And so I think all they wanted to know are these things that you're seeing harming you? Were they taking your airplanes down? And they weren't. It was almost like they were observing. The government knew that. Now, what the government made of that, I don't know. But obviously, it was a back burner item, given that we're in an existential war with the Axis powers. We know that. Before that, there's the odd event that might have happened in 1896. I think it was down in Texas, but I don't think that was a big deal for the government. So we just don't know much. For me, the modern era of the phenomena and the truth embargo begins in 1947, though for me, the real beginning of the phenomena occurs after the bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I believe the dropping of those two bombs triggered not a complete, but a very substantial change in the plan of engagement. Whatever the ETs have, whatever that is, but that changed. And we were in another era, and extraterrestrial phenomena started turning up in much more often. And I think that is true, but that's an opinion of mine. But clearly it begins when the press release is put out by Blanchard, by Haught, with the approval of the base commander Blanchard, to the world in July the 8th of 1947, saying, we have a flying saucer. I have a copy of it on my wall. That's the beginning of the modern era. And what we know since then is highly limited, because the government has instituted quite effective and consistent truth embargo and classified 90+% of everything. So that's tough enough. And as far as before 97, we just don't know very much. But there are researchers looking into that. God bless them. If we get full disclosure, I think we may learn about events prior to 47, which will be quite interesting, and it'll be good to know.